had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Good afternoon, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. With us today, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan, it's really great having you on the program. I've got a bunch of things that I'm very much looking forward to talking with you about, asking you about. But first of all, how are you doing?
I'm well, Dr. Whitcomb. Thank you for this invitation. I know you've had a number of guests prior to to my arrival, and it's really nice to be in such esteemed company. So yes, I'm Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm known locally here in Milwaukee as Mr. Fitz, affectionately from my students, many students. I'm well. We're 4 weeks into the school year here and I feel very organized. The kids are fired up and ready to go, and we're well on our way for a great year.
That's exciting. Yeah, and a great program you have there too. Definitely one of the things that we want to get to. But first of all, just kind of a tradition for anybody watching this who is not yet familiar with you and your work. Can you give us the story of kind of like how did you get started on cello in the first place, and then your musical journey that brought you to where you are now?
Yes, yeah. So both of my parents were musicians, are musicians. They had initially tried to get me some piano lessons at the age of 3 or 4, and somebody at the music shop had said that that was way too young. And of course, in hindsight, knowing having my Suzuki training and my musical experiences, of course, that's not true whatsoever. So I didn't actually start music seriously till middle school. I started in public schools. I was originally going to play the saxophone, and I opted to uh, go with my second choice, which was the cello. And my parents were both mortified. They were both had band backgrounds, and my dad marched in the Cavaliers. And so to go to a to orchestra setting was something a little frightening for them, while being very exciting for me. So yeah. And then I took lessons. I got started lessons after about a year of playing in public schools with my first teacher, Carol Sims. And she was my teacher through high school and really and gave me the tools to take this to the next level collegiately. I found myself attending Indiana University to study with Emilio Colon, one of my great mentors and teachers, longtime friend and colleague of Mr. Starker. So I followed Mr. Starker's lineage. One of my COVID projects, so as you can see here in the corner on the wall, was this big cello teacher tree. And
Nice.
it has probably maybe 80 some teachers on it, going all the way back to Pachelbel. So pretty cool side project for COVID times. Yes. So from there, I took a job in Illinois. My first job was teaching middle school orchestra and kindergarten music. And that was really a fabulous experience. I also played in the Civic Orchestra in Chicago for 2 years there as a co-principal. I began a master's degree at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana with Daniel McDonough of the Jupiter String Quartet, and I got a lot of chamber music experience there. That was really quite eye-opening and a real blessing to work with those musicians for sure. Um, that completed my schooling, and then I have more adventures that I'm sure I'll get to along the way.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and keep going with that if you would, because
Sure, yeah,
it's kind of funny. I never get tired of small world stories, and just
yes,
like even some of the past guests on here, David Kaplan, who has been a guest, succeeded you as principal of Chicago Civic, and then in Fairbanks, we've had both Linda Jennings and Carl Knapp on
yes,
this program. So
yes.
keep going if you would.
And Carl is a Madison native, as
Right,
I recall.
right.
Yes, okay, very good. Yes, Carl's the colleague I feel like I never had. He's come up a couple of odd times in my life. But yeah, so I my after my graduate studies, I took a job as an assistant professor, a term professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where I spent 4 years living in Alaska at the university. Not living at the university, but I felt like it, the collegiate teaching
Oh,
sometimes.
yes.
So there I was in charge of music education classes. I played principal cello in the Fairbanks Symphony with Edward Zilberkant and my great colleague, Dr. Brian Hall. who is now a violin professor in Georgia. We played in the Alaska Piano Trio, hosted an international Yamaha piano competition, um, and played many rounds of chamber music there as well. So my studies with the with the Jupiter String Quartet came in very handy for that. And I also got very heavily involved with the Suzuki community and the Alaska Cello Intensive. And if you YouTubed Alaska Cello Intensive, you would find at least one video that has at least more than 1 million views on there. So quite a fun group, very accomplished musicians all the way around. So I spent 4 years there, and then I sidestepped to teach privately for 2 years and moved to Anchorage, where I met my now wife, and we've since moved to Wisconsin here about 3 years ago, where I've been teaching high school orchestra at the in the Elmbrook School District here in Brookfield, and I also direct in the Milwaukee Youth Orchestras. I play principal cello in the Wisconsin Philharmonic and sub in the Milwaukee Symphony. Um, Trace has been, as I understand, a guest on your program many times. We've been
Yep.
stand partners more than once, yes. And what else do I do? I play in a rock band called Joe 2.0, which features an electric string quartet with a drummer and Zeno, who is the first singer of Cheap Trick. So we do all kinds of summer festivals. We played at the State Fair. We play at the casino here in town a little bit. So and I have my private studio, and of course, in addition to that, my Suzuki students. So I have no shortage of things to keep me busy, musically speaking.
Wow. Yes, that's an understatement, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe 2.0 was even here in Fort Atkinson, collaborated with the string program here, I remember.
He was just mentioning that to me, so I think we're going to try and do something this year here in Brookfield.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I think that's so neat, those sorts of collaborations with school orchestras where, I mean, you know how it is. It can be inspiring to so many students for a long time to have
Yes.
a collaboration like that. That's really great.
Yes.
Well, let's see. So, out of that order of things, let's start here. Out of the cello teachers that you've had, a lot of us, their words just rattle around in our brain on a
Yes.
regular basis, particularly when we have a cello in our hands. What are some of the most impactful things that you learned from your cello teachers that you use on practically a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, I. It's funny you say that our teachers' words sort of continue to ring through through our minds for throughout our careers, right? So I try to approach my teaching and with respect to my teachers to try to learn something from everybody. If you could sort of take that one thing away, and I think that's sort of what you're asking is, uh, what are your takeaways from these teachers? And I feel like all of them were enormously passionate people, um, of course through music, but also as humans and wanting success. I think from each of their students, whatever that might look like. Um, I feel like they were very present with me through every lesson and every success and certainly every failure along the way. They were, again, of course, fabulous cellists and musicians, but I think more than that, they were and are, they're still around, still, they're really, really wonderful people who have a lot of life experience and a lot of perspective to share. And I think they were all very good at keeping that perspective um, uh, on the ground level for us in our lessons.
Nice. That's well said. I like that a lot. You know, there's so many really great and super inspiring cello teachers. We're very lucky. I would love to. There are a couple that of yours that I have not crossed paths with, but not only would I love to cross paths with Helga Winold at some point,
Yes.
but then her husband Alan, who had written the that pair of distinctive books on the Bach suites. Uh,
Yes.
it would have been nice to have met him. I use those every time a student plays
Yes.
anything from the box suites. That's mandatory
Yeah.
that they look at that
Yes. Yeah.
information.
It's quite a remarkable publication. I think I've actually got them. Maybe they've changed since I've had them a long time now, but I had them spiral bound because I was just using them so often that
Right.
the spine itself had sort of become undone. So yeah, they're definitely spiral bound at this point.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's see. Suzuki, the Suzuki training.
Yes.
I mean, even some people who have had just training on the first couple books still find that very impactful on their teaching as a whole. To go through all 10, I'm wondering, so in what ways do you find that the Suzuki approach also informs your teaching even outside of what's literally Suzuki?
Yes, yeah. The method of Suzuki, is really based in the mother tongue approach that music is learned like a language, and so there is an enormous amount of listening to, of course, the Suzuki reference recordings, I think, but also things that are beyond Book 10, those big concertos, those great orchestral works, chamber music. So I feel like going through my Suzuki training was like the equivalent of doing another degree and a half. To some extent, I don't know how to play the cello without thinking about Suzuki in some way, shape, or form.
Wow.
Um, I never get tired of book one. Um, I have gone through all 10 books through the Suzuki Association, and book one is, it's 17 pieces. It takes maybe 20 minutes to play through all of those pieces if you just sit down, and so anybody can do it in their one lesson, at a certain point, um, but or any practice session, and it's always humbling, and it never it never feels easy, and I stopped using the word basic actually because it's really just fundamental, and those fundamentals I think are, as you know as well, just they build on everything, and that's as far as the repertoire goes. But as a philosophy, as I was saying too, the mother tongue approach, the idea of listening. Suzuki wasn't necessarily aiming to create virtuoso players, although that was certainly a byproduct of his approach. But his idea was to create beautiful people and people who were compassionate and who shared their art and loved music. So, in fact, up here, Suzuki hangs on my studio wall here. There's a little painting he did, and it's from 1991 when he was 93 years old. And on the back, he wrote, "Man is a son of his environment," and signed it. And so Suzuki literally lives in this room, while we have our lessons. So
Love
he's
it.
a big part of that philosophy, and I think that also translates, as you were also getting at, towards the not Suzuki approach. As I teach this high school orchestra, there's people come from all kinds of backgrounds and various degrees of lessons or not lessons, and that's really what I get at the most. I think in terms of my philosophy to teaching is just to be a compassionate person who's realistic about the goals of these students and the multi-faceted people that they are, to just help them along and continue to love music along the way.
Tremendous. I love that. Let's see. So now also kind of somewhat still also along the same lines, the degree to which Ryan, the baton wielder,
Yes, yes,
not only with your very fine orchestra program, high school orchestra program, but then also at MISO. How does that, your conducting chops apply to your approach to whether musicality or whatever in cello playing, and how does your cello playing inform what you do on the podium?
yes. Thank you. Well, you mentioned the programs here, and I would just shout out my colleagues who, as a high school director, they go through a number of teachers to reach that point, and so I just want to credit my colleagues for allowing them to really blossom and bloom, that we can play some really delightful repertoire and varied repertoire at that level. Um, Yeah, so as a baton wheeler, I certainly don't think of myself as a conductor, although that is a hat I wear on a daily basis. It's a rather small hat, I feel like. Uh, um, but yeah, I try not to be too over the top with any of that. My first conducting experience, in hindsight, of course, wish was earlier, but it wasn't until college, and it was actually a choral conductor. That was my first conducting teacher, and that I think was a very different experience than if someone had started with an instrument, like had a mock instrumental ensemble in front of them. Um, it's there's some subtleties about it that I think lend itself well to conducting strings, as opposed to being perhaps a, a a marching band sort of situation, or like a larger wind ensemble or something like that. I just feel like the way that you approach the bow versus the way that you might approach the breath, um, there could be some similarities there, and I think that was really helpful to start with a choral from a choral perspective, actually.
Actually, if I can jump in
Yes,
with an amen,
yes,
it seems because isn't even so you do adjudicating as well as
I
do I,
have.
and
Yes,
there will be times that just I mean it's I mean not all the time, but not infrequent that you find yourself writing to a string group that they have to breathe at the end of
yes,
phrases, and even within musical phrases where the ideas are, which you naturally do with the human voice. And so I could
yes,
see how starting from that standpoint of breathing, uh,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. Is how you prepare, or how you cut off to prepare that next area. Now, that's not to say that, of course, our wind playing colleagues um, don't do any of that. Of course, they need to breathe as well. I think there's a certain visual, though, to actually using a physical gesture and literally moving the body, uh, sort of a happy medium, perhaps, between the choral world and other instrumental worlds.
nice.
Yeah, yes. I will say I don't feel like I direct too differently from my ensemble in MISO in these orchestras here, which is the earliest ensemble that the organization offers. Many of them are between the third and sixth grade, versus my high school ensemble, who've had many years of conducting in front of them. So I feel like I just approach both with the same sort of mentality, and attempt to be clear, to really articulate where those phrases are, and those, like you mentioned, those breath points.
Nice. So let's see. Um, I know, at least for the sake of my students who watch these interviews, there's a degree to which I like to point out how many of my guests seem to be cut from the yes and approach rather than, ooh, I'm not so sure. I don't really do that. And so to think about how between the Suzuki world, again, doing cello, doing solo, doing chamber music, doing orchestral, then also the podium, Joe 2.0, uh, giving presentations in MEA, music
Yes,
educators and ASTA presentations, there's a degree to which it can be so beneficial in our field to be willing to say, yes, I'm going to do that too. I'm not going to be afraid to go off in a new direction. So I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts about having that sort of yes, bring on all kinds of music. I'm in it for everything.
sure. Yeah. Well, I've I feel like I have and I'm in a pretty in good company when I say that I enjoy an eclectic amount of music. I go to those rock festivals with my wife, and we go to see the symphony, and we check in with our family members who are also going to shows, and asking them about how that experience was. I encourage my students to look for tickets and bands that they want to go see. Again, just to keep them involved in music and such. But yeah, like with like the Joe 2.0 thing, for instance, that playing an electric instrument with using the pedals and having like a looper station,
Yeah.
and that's all somewhat new to me, even though I was kind of dabbling with that a long time ago, and the technology's changed a lot to make it a lot more accessible, I think, than it used to be. Um, that's been pretty wild, and it's very inspiring to take that and then come back to the the more traditional classical approach, or even the Suzuki approach, where you have experience playing this other instrument with these other sounds, and that kind of reinvigorates your approach and thinking towards something more traditional. I feel like that's been really exciting for me as a performer. It's a totally different kind of audience that is drawn to that as well. It does merge the two worlds, and there are a lot of people that do it really well out there that that just make a name for themselves being versatile. It's really it's really challenging, I think, to be it becoming more challenging to be kind of niche, where you are hyper focused on this one thing, and that can certainly take you far if you have those opportunities and create them. Although I think it's so much more invigorating and worthwhile to explore some of that. Um, I would call it fringe, but it's not so fringe anymore. It's another category of musicianship.
Yeah, yeah. That's also, I think, very well said. I also like the bit of, the two different kinds of audiences, and you read about things like crossover repertoire. And in a
Yeah,
way, I don't know, it's like classical art music. It's nice when people realize kind of not to be afraid of it. Once they hear a classical piece 7 times or something, now it's something they know, and they love it. So how do we connect? Um, yeah, anyway, your I think your attitude is spot on when it comes to those things. So I have a question I ask all guests, which is about motivating their students when they need motivation to practice, motivation to get their instrument out. And I mean, like with some other guests as well, it's you've clearly already demonstrated quite a bit of answer to that already. I can only imagine how motivating it is to them when you get out your cello and play. At a very high level, a variety of styles and
sure.
such. But we all know those times when a student just kind of needs a little bit of extra help to keep going on the rate of advancement. I'm just wondering, what are some of your favorite go-tos for helping them keep practicing and keep advancing like that?
Yeah, great question. And I would maybe tail end on that and say it's not, of course, not just students, but also us professionals sometimes. The days are long, and so to and we have many priorities, and most of them can't be put off. So it's hard when we've spent so much time with our instrument already. Even it can be easy to feel like, well, I can get to that later. It's not quite as pressing. But I tell students all the time, and I see it in the classroom too. The most challenging thing I think about practicing is getting your instrument out. Is just getting started. So it's just like literally unzipping the case or unbuckling the case, and once your instrument's in your hand, the time can really go away pretty quickly for a lot of these kids, and even us as players and preparing for our work. Um, the the hardest thing is just getting the instrument out. So I have like a Hercules like cello stand that it sits on in here, in this nice, in a room that doesn't get a ton of traffic. This is my teaching studio. Um, and so that's nice to have for students, just that it's readily accessible. Um, the I also encourage them to, even if it's just to start playing something they like from the beginning, to get to feel like, okay, I have this routine. This is something I've enjoyed listening to lately, or I'm going to try and figure this melody out. So starting with those small steps, and the proverb, every journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? So those are the places I feel like I would start. You could also do, as in the Suzuki method, it's just, listening before you play, so you have that model right away for what you're aiming to sound like or be inspired by.
Hmm.
Uh, I find that a lot of students have apprehension toward performing, but if they can find the mindset to play for themselves, regardless of the outcome, that is also really, without judgment or fear of failure, perhaps, is also a really valuable mindset and approach to take.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Hey, and somehow something in what you said reminded me that on your bio you mentioned that you play on a 2017 Wedby.
I do, yes.
Isn't it great that we, whatever else one can say about the age that we live in, the advances in modern cello making, string making in general, so that, I mean, what is the quality of instrument that you can get and the sound and the response and everything for a much more affordable price
Yes.
than in the old days.
Historically, yes, yes. Yeah, it's I had played a Wedby. At the first time I had attended the Aspen Festival, Aspen Music Festival. I think that was in 2016. I had played a cello, and I had really loved it. And so I had just reached out to Mr. Wedby, who lives in Chicago. And I'm from Illinois and had spent lots of time in Chicago. It's a home away from home for me for sure. And he said, "Sure, come on by." And so my friend and I, we went over there, and he showed us the shop, and he was such a delightful person to work with and meet. And I was interested in the cello, so he over the next few months he had a couple for me to try, and I had played this one, and I was just set. It was just such a no brainer for me.
Nice.
So I went that route, and I really don't feel like I need to look for another instrument anytime soon. Certainly,
Right.
it's just it's my go-to, and um, I play a Rodney Moore bow that I also really love. And again, I just don't feel like I have to look, or I like I'm not. It's not that I'm not interested in looking. It's just I don't. There's nothing.
They're already.
It's this is my voice for the foreseeable future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That just, I mean, that alone can make high quality uh, music playing so much more accessible to so many people that it's, not the price of a
Yes.
house
Yes.
necessarily to get a
Yes.
really good
Of
sound.
course, that's right. Well, and I also I had a Louis and Clark cello for a long time, and I've had a couple of electric instruments, and those are also just so different in terms of exploring sounds.
Yeah.
Um, the technology. Yeah.
Right. And for not that much money.
No, yeah, it becomes very accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, Ryan, upcoming concerts, projects, what's coming down the pike?
Yes. Well, to tomorrow, there's a Wisconsin Philharmonic concert at Oconomowoc Arts Center. We have Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with Soo-Yoon Kim, who's here from Korea. She's 15 and playing Mendelssohn Concerto. She visited one of the schools yesterday, and it was a really fabulous experience for those students to hear her and hear her answer her questions and things like that. We are also playing Rachmaninoff Symphony Number 3 and music Korngold from Robin Hood, music from Robin Hood. So a delightful, again, eclectic program which is the best kind of program in my opinion. The the stuff that goes off in every direction. There's something for everybody there. So that's first coming up. Next month we have there's a couple of Joe 2.0 concerts. You can find out more about that on his website, Joe 2.0. Then we also have the youth orchestras coming up. Yeah, so for very early November.
You happen to have your that what'd you call it? The tree of cello
Yes,
teachers available online anywhere.
I don't, but I could certainly make it available if
I
you're
think that'd be
curious.
really cool. I would
Sure,
totally include that link, and I think you'd get a lot of
sure.
hits for that. That's
Okay,
that's
good. Well, it certainly doesn't include everybody, and I did my best to ensure that there weren't too many mistakes. But it's not, the thing with teacher trees and thinking about your grand teacher or great grand teacher is that a lot of those things weren't necessarily written down, and who
Yeah.
knows how long somebody studied with who, or uh, maybe it was just hearsay. So, but it was certainly a very interesting exploratory topic, and I have an interest in genealogy, and so it was a fun puzzle to put together. And it's on this big 11. Well, I don't know how big it is. It's enormous, as you
Okay.
can see. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I think that would be that. I would love to look at that. I know.
Sure.
All right. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for your time. This has been really, really fun, very interesting and inspiring. And I know for all of you out there, I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful weekend and week of practicing until we meet again this time next Friday.
You had me at jello.